James had been sitting at his desk for 12 hours, the hum of the fluorescent lights a constant in his ears. He rubbed his eyes, feeling the dry scratch of exhaustion in his lids. The pile of invoices, receipts, and financial reports in front of him blurred together, his fingers numb from hours of typing. Another day, another month of budget meetings, spreadsheets, and deadlines. The ticking of the clock was louder now, a drumbeat in the silence of the office. He glanced at the window. Dark. Another late night. Again. James stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He stretched his back, rolling his neck. The office air felt stale, thick with the quiet desperation of everyone still working. He didn't care. He couldn't stay here anymore. He grabbed his jacket, slinging it over his shoulder without looking back at the desk. The door closed behind him with a soft click. The street outside was empty, the city slowly exhaling as the last of the day's workers headed home. It felt good. The night air was cool against his face, and for the first time in weeks, he felt the weight of his thoughts lift, even if just a little. He needed a break, a real one, not the kind of time off that came with a day at the beach or a weekend trip to some resort with overpriced cocktails and too many people. No, he needed something else. Something that didn't involve staring at numbers or dealing with the endless strings of emails. He needed to leave everything behind. His mind wandered back to the idea that had been nagging him for weeks. The hiking trip, a backpacking adventure through the countryside. It was simple enough. No agenda, no pressure. Just him, his boots, and the road. No phones, no emails, no deadlines. He hadn't even picked a place, but it didn't matter. It was the escape that mattered. He stood on the corner of the street, watching the cars pass by. He thought about the trip again, the quiet, the open sky, the sounds of the wind and the birds. He could almost feel the dirt beneath his boots already. It was a stupid idea. He didn't know the first thing about backpacking. His idea of roughing it was a hotel with no room service. But hell, it didn't matter. He was 35 years old, and he was done being swallowed whole by the grind. He couldn't keep doing this. His body was already breaking down, aching muscles, tension headaches, the dull hum of fatigue that never seemed to go away. He didn't even know why he still stayed in this city. The corporate world wasn't him anymore. It never had been. Maybe that was the point. Maybe this trip was more than just a break. Maybe it was the start of something else. With a deep breath, he turned and walked toward the train station. His footsteps were quick, deliberate. The plan was already forming in his mind. Pack light, take a bus or train out to some remote spot in the countryside. Let his feet take him where they would. He didn't need to know the details. The details could wait. Right now, the only thing he needed was to leave. The train ride was quiet. Most of the passengers were half sleeping, heads leaning against the windows or slouched in their seats. The rhythmic clatter of the train on the tracks was the only sound, and James let it wash over him, calming the chaos in his mind. He glanced out the window, watching the city recede into the distance, the skyline shrinking, becoming less real. The countryside would be different. Open fields, rolling hills, a break from the noise. Maybe he'd finally clear his head. Maybe he'd find what he was looking for out there. He pulled the map from his bag, its edges worn and curling. An old thing. The kind of map his father might have used. The kind that didn't show highways or interstates, just winding roads through villages, rivers, and mountains. He wasn't even sure how it had ended up in his backpack. He couldn't remember packing it. Maybe he'd grabbed it out of habit. Maybe it was just what he had, old and forgotten, just like everything else. The map was marked with scribbled notes, faded pencil lines tracing out paths that probably didn't exist anymore. He squinted at the ink smudges, trying to make sense of the scribbles. There was no real destination, no town names, just a vague idea of where he could go. It didn't matter. He didn't need to know. The train slowed as it pulled into a small station. James stood up, stretching again. The station was empty, except for a few people who didn't seem to notice him. He grabbed his bag and stepped off the train, the cool air greeting him as he walked toward the exit. He had no plan, no clear idea of what came next. But that was fine. For the first time in years, He didn't feel the pull of responsibility. There were no deadlines here, no expectations. Just him and the open road. He stepped out onto the platform, the silence settling over him like a weight. The world was different here. It wasn't city streets and flashing lights. It wasn't concrete and glass. It was grass and stone, the smell of earth in the air. James adjusted the straps of his backpack and headed toward the nearest path, his boots crunching against the gravel. The weight of the bag felt right, simple. He took a deep breath. The air here was cleaner. The sky, wider. There were no emails here, no numbers. Just the land, just the next step. It was going to be enough. The path wound through the moorland, dotted with wildflowers that clung to the edges of the trail. James walked for hours, his thoughts drifting like the wind across the fields. Every step took him farther from the life he'd known, farther from the office, from the constant hum of responsibility. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt his chest unclench. By evening, the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the moors. James stopped at a crossroads, unsure of which path to take. He glanced at his map, but it was no use. The roads weren't marked. The names didn't match. It didn't matter. He was here. That was enough for now. The air was cool, and the horizon seemed endless. For a moment, he stood still, the quiet around him settling deep in his bones. No sounds, no distractions, just him and the open land. He smiled. James paused, the soles of his boots sinking into the damp earth as he took in the crossroads ahead. The moor stretched out around him, endless and desolate, the vastness pressing in on all sides. He'd been walking for hours, the landscape seeming to twist and turn with every step, the path narrowing and then broadening again. The sun, now a sliver on the horizon, bathed the scene in a soft, dying light, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch too far. He squinted into the fading day, noticing the dilapidated road signs ahead. They stood crookedly, their posts leaning to one side, as though the wind had been relentless in its assault. The paint on the signs was chipped and worn, their once bold lettering now faded into near invisibility. The first sign pointed to a village he didn't recognize, its name barely legible. The second sign, even more weathered, pointed down a narrow road to a place he was sure didn't exist. It was like something out of an old legend, a name that didn't match any place on his map. Curiosity tugged at him, and he approached the signs. His footsteps were slow and deliberate, each one heavier than the last, like he was moving through water. The sound of the wind, a steady howl, was starting to feel oppressive, as if it were closing in on him. He looked down at his map again. He had hoped it would offer some guidance, but now, as he ran his finger along the lines, it was clear that most of the roads here were either missing or so distorted that they barely resembled the real landscape. He could make out a faint road where the sign pointed, but the place it led to, it wasn't listed. Maybe just an old mistake, he muttered under his breath, his voice barely rising above the wind. He adjusted his backpack and leaned in closer, inspecting the worn lettering. The name on the sign was something like Chesterfield, but the second one, Bramford, seemed entirely foreign to him. He stood there for a moment, trying to think. The road stretched out in front of him, narrowing toward a dark thicket of trees, the kind of trees that looked older than any he'd seen. Their twisted, gnarled branches stood against the twilight sky, skeletal figures in the gloom. A shiver ran down his spine. "I'll just keep going," he muttered again, more to himself than anything. But something in the air felt wrong. The wind had died down suddenly, leaving behind an unsettling silence. The moorland, usually full of distant sounds, now seemed eerily still. Even the birds had stopped their calling, as if they'd all disappeared at once. James rubbed his eyes, trying to shake off the sensation that something was creeping up on him. This wasn't right. He shouldn't have taken that shortcut earlier. He had known better, but he'd been too eager to reach the village. His phone had no signal for hours. There hadn't been a soul in sight for miles. He glanced back the way he had come, but the path seemed to melt into the thickening fog. Turning back didn't seem like an option now. The road behind him was lost in the haze, and the only choice was to keep moving forward. Still, the sign, those strange names, hung in his mind like a dull weight. He wondered who put them there, and why. Just a signpost, he muttered again, but the words didn't feel as comforting as they had before. His gaze shifted to the horizon, where the sun had almost completely disappeared. The last light was bleeding out of the sky, leaving behind a cold, violet hue. The kind of light that made you question how much time had really passed. He stepped forward, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. The road was narrow now, the grass beginning to push in on either side. The air felt thick, more oppressive. Each breath seemed heavier than the last. James wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, though the air had cooled significantly. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was just beyond his reach. Watching, waiting. A gust of wind picked up, howling through the trees, snapping him out of his trance. He stumbled back, blinking rapidly as the air seemed to thicken, pressing against him. A low rumble echoed from the trees ahead, deep and rumbling like a growl. James took a step back, suddenly aware of the growing sense of unease settling in his stomach. His heartbeat quickened. The shadows between the trees were stretching longer, creeping across the path in front of him. The sign, the names, it all felt wrong, out of place. He looked at the map again. His finger traced the lines, trying to line them up with the signs, but it was useless. The path leading to Brantford wasn't on the map at all. There was no record of it, no sign of it in the modern world. Just a blank space. Okay, let's think, James muttered, pressing his palm against his forehead, trying to steady his mind. It's an old map. Maybe it's just an old path, something forgotten. But his voice faltered in the wind. Something was definitely off, and it wasn't just the map. His gut churned with the nagging feeling that he was standing on the edge of something ancient, something that shouldn't be here anymore. He could hear the trees again. The whispering wind was louder now, almost like a voice. He wasn't sure why, but it was like the space was pressing in on him, closing in. His feet moved on their own, stepping back, away from the path. He shook his head, breathing deeply. You're overthinking this. You're just tired. You need sleep. But when he turned back to the path he'd been walking down, it wasn't the same anymore. The road had twisted. It had changed while he wasn't looking. A chill ran through him. He stood frozen, unable to move. The only sound now was his own breathing, ragged and loud in his ears. And in the distance, something shifted. James pushed on, the narrow road winding deeper into the moors. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the faintest trace of decay. His feet were sore, each step a small protest against the weight of his pack, but he moved forward. It was the only thing left to do. The sun was now a faint memory, swallowed by the darkening sky. A faint mist began to rise, creeping along the ground in quiet tendrils. James shivered, though the air wasn't cold. His mind had started to settle into an uneasy rhythm, one that only heightened when the shadows around him seemed to shift. It started slow. At first, a faint rustle in the bushes to his left, then a whisper of movement behind him. He ignored it. The wind, the trees, the swaying grasses. It was all natural. But his senses sharpened, and with each sound, each creak of the branches, his pulse quickened. He couldn't shake the feeling. Something was watching him. James kept his pace steady, eyes darting to the sides. The path stretched before him, an endless expanse of earth and stone. But there was something wrong about it. His legs felt heavy, as if the weight of the landscape itself was dragging him down. The map in his hand, faded and brittle, did little to ease the mounting tension in his chest. He checked it again. The road was marked. He was on the right path, but the names didn't match the surroundings. The village he was supposed to pass. The map, old as it was supposed to give him a sense of direction, a feeling of security. But it was failing him. The edges were frayed, the ink worn thin, and the words blurred. It was all wrong. He scanned the lines again, trying to make sense of it. But the more he studied it, the less it seemed to help. The path veered off to the left here. Nothing. The trees that lined the road didn't match the ones on the map. There was no mention of this thicket, this strange bend in the road. The more he looked, the more confused he became. Another rustle. This one was closer. James froze, heart thumping in his chest. He glanced behind him, but the moor stretched empty. He frowned and turned forward again, his mouth dry. Nothing. Nothing's there. He tried to tell himself it was the isolation, the fatigue. The map was old, and maybe it wasn't meant to be trusted anymore. But every step felt heavier now, and the feeling that someone, or something, was following him was starting to get under his skin. He had been alone too long, too quiet. His mind was overworked, stretched thin from weeks of number crunching, from the constant pressure of deadlines and spreadsheets. Maybe he was just imagining it. The wind was playing tricks, or the distant trees were whispering in a way they never had before. The road ahead twisted, a sharp turn into deeper thickets, shadows swallowing what little light was left. His steps slowed. Something was off. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled. This is ridiculous, James thought. You're just paranoid. It's nothing. He kept walking, eyes fixed ahead, determined to push through the nagging unease. But with each step, the paranoia deepened. The whispers in the wind were growing louder now. They weren't just the sound of leaves. They were voices, faint and unintelligible, murmuring just outside his hearing. His breath came faster. He checked the map again. It was supposed to be straightforward. The road he'd seen on the map should have been long gone by now, but here he was, standing on a path that didn't seem to exist. The villages weren't adding up. The landmarks weren't matching up. The trees, not the same. Everything around him felt off, like the landscape was shifting when he wasn't looking. A sense of dread gnawed at his stomach. The wind had picked up again, but it was different this time. Colder, more insistent, as if something was pushing against him, urging him forward. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. There was no reason to panic. Just keep walking. You're fine, he muttered aloud, but even his own voice sounded strained. The path stretched ahead like some endless tunnel, and James realized he had been walking too long without a break. He checked his watch. He had no idea what time it was anymore. The daylight had long since vanished, and now the night pressed in, suffocating in its stillness. He had lost track of time, of reality. Something moved behind him. James whipped around, but there was nothing. The moor stretched out behind him, quiet, undisturbed. His breath came faster now, short and shallow. His legs trembled, and for a moment, he almost felt like turning back. But the thought of retracing his steps, back to the crossroads, to the sign, made his skin crawl. No, he couldn't go back. He was already too far. He had to find the village. Something normal. He kept his pace, quicker now, his mind a whirl of confusion. The map, the road, the village. It didn't make sense. Another rustle, this time louder, closer. James's stomach lurched. His eyes darted, searching the darkness, the whispering wind, the rustling. He was sure it wasn't just the trees. His footfalls felt heavier now, muffled by the thickening air. The shadows pressed in tighter, the road narrowing, like it was forcing him down towards something, or someone. Something was wrong. He could feel it, deep in his bones. The air was thick with the scent of rot now, as if the earth itself had begun to spoil beneath his feet. His hands shook. The map trembled in his grip. It wasn't right. He glanced ahead, searching for any sign of a village, but there was only the same twisted path, the same endless stretch of moorland, the same trees, their branches swaying in the wind like skeletal arms reaching out for him. He took a step forward. The next, he wasn't sure he even moved. The whispering was louder now, close, right behind him. It felt like fingers brushing against his neck. "Who's there?" James called out, his voice a rasp. but his words seemed to disappear in the wind, swallowed by the growing silence. Nothing answered. James walked slower now, each step deliberate. The moor stretched around him, darkening with the encroaching twilight, the horizon blurring in the deepening fog. His breath came in shallow bursts. The road ahead, winding and narrow, seemed endless, disappearing into the haze. The quiet weighed on him, thick and suffocating. It was as if the air itself had grown heavier. The whispers of the wind had stopped, leaving only the eerie silence behind. Then he saw it. A figure. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the mist, some figment his tired eyes had conjured. But no, it was a man, standing motionless in the distance, just beyond the edge of the road. His silhouette was dark against the fading light, a stark contrast to the pale fog surrounding him. He was still, unnaturally so. James could see the outline of his shoulders, the shape of his head turned slightly toward the horizon, as if he were staring out over the vast expanse of the moors. James's heart skipped. The hair on the back of his neck prickled. He stopped, frozen in place, unsure of what to do. The figure was too still, too distant to make out any detail, but something about him seemed wrong. He didn't belong there, standing alone on the moor at this hour, his body perfectly rigid, not moving even as the wind began to pick up again. James shifted his weight, trying to decide whether to approach, to call out. Was he lost, like James? Was he someone who had found this lonely road too, or was he something else? The idea of walking closer sent an uncomfortable ripple of uncertainty through his chest. There was something unsettling in the stillness of the figure, a quiet that seemed too deep, too strange. He took a step forward, and his breath caught in his throat. Before he could move another inch, the figure jerked. It wasn't a shift of the body, not a twitch of the head. It was a sudden, sharp disappearance. One moment, the figure stood, solid and unmoving. The next, it was gone. Just vanished. James blinked. Once. Twice. His legs went stiff, and a shiver crawled up his spine. The fog had thickened almost imperceptibly in the last few moments, but the figure had disappeared far too quickly. No slow retreat, no gradual blending into the mist. Just gone, like it had never been there. He stood still for several moments, staring at the spot where the man had been. The fog, rolling and swirling, gave no sign that anyone had been standing there. There were no footprints in the damp earth, no movement in the fog, just a deep, thickening silence that seemed to choke everything else out. Get moving. Keep walking. The air was colder now, his breath catching in short bursts as he walked faster, almost running, driven by an instinct he couldn't identify. The fog pressed in tighter, curling around the edges of his sight, turning the landscape into an indistinct blur. His pace quickened, but the road seemed to stretch farther ahead, the village he sought no closer than it had been before. Every step felt heavy, like wading through thick mud, the fog clawing at his thoughts. He stopped again. Another rustle. A low sound, too soft to place, like footsteps, but far too faint to be sure. His skin prickled. The air seemed to thicken, the fog swirling faster now, almost unnaturally so. It wasn't just the darkness or the cold, it was the feeling that something was out there, watching, waiting. James clenched his teeth, swallowing the rising panic. He wasn't that far from civilization. He couldn't be. He had to keep going. But the longer he walked, the more the fog seemed to grow. It wasn't just the weather, it was the sense that the path itself was shifting. Every time he looked up, the trees lining the road appeared to be different, the landmarks changing, like he was walking in circles. He glanced behind him again. The figure was gone. There was nothing. Still, the weight of being watched hung in the air like smoke. It settled into his skin, making the hairs on his arms stand on end. He kept walking. The fog closed in, pressing tighter against him. His breath was ragged now, every step a struggle. The road stretched endlessly ahead, the village just a mirage, a figment of his imagination. There was no turning back. A flicker in the fog. A movement, too fast to catch. He whipped his head around, but there was nothing. Only the fog. James's legs burned with every step. Every time he glanced over his shoulder, the fog seemed to tighten around him, suffocating him with its cold, clammy grip. The strange feeling of being watched hadn't left him. In fact, it seemed to be growing. A flicker of light ahead caught his attention. Weak, dim, but there, his heart skipped. He squinted through the fog, focusing on the glow. A building, maybe. An inn. He hadn't expected to find anything out here, let alone shelter. His feet quickened, drawn by the faint light that promised warmth, even if it was just an illusion. As he neared, the shape of the inn became clearer, rising out of the fog like a shadow from a forgotten time. The structure was old, weathered wood, and cracked stone, with a sagging roof that looked like it had endured countless storms. A sign hung crookedly above the door, its letters faded by years of rain and wind. The only source of light came from the flickering candle flames behind the grimy windows. The soft glow seemed to pulse, casting long shadows across the ground. James stopped at the edge of the inn's small yard. His breath came heavy and uneven, each exhale rising in the cool air like smoke. He looked up at the door, its wood worn smooth from years of use. The silence of the place pressed down on him, thick and heavy. No voices, no sounds of life. The windows were dark, except for those faint, flickering lights. A strange stillness hung in the air, as though the world beyond the inn had ceased to exist. He stepped forward, his boots scraping against the gravel. His skin prickled, an unease crawling up his spine. He paused a few steps from the door, staring at the worn brass handle. His eyes flicked to the windows again. There was movement behind one of them, but it was too faint to discern. A figure, perhaps. A shadow, just a suggestion of movement, like something or someone waiting. He swallowed hard, a bitter taste rising in his throat. He needed rest. He needed shelter. His legs were shaky beneath him, his mind clouded with exhaustion and doubt. But the instinct to step back, to turn around, pulled at him like a string tied too tightly around his chest. There was something wrong here. Something in the air, in the quiet. The last thing he wanted was to step into another trap, but he was too tired to care. Too tired to make the right decision. James hesitated, one hand still hovering over the door handle. The soft wind rustled through the trees behind him, and the fog whispered, pulling at him like a half-formed thought he couldn't catch. He looked over his shoulder once more, but the moor was as desolate and empty as ever. No sign of the figure he'd seen earlier, no shadow lurking, just the cold, unfeeling fog. He took a breath. It felt like the longest inhale of his life. His hand closed around the door handle, and with a soft creak, the door swung open. The interior was dimly lit, the glow of candles and a low fire dancing in the hearth. The room smelled faintly of wood smoke and stale beer. A long bar ran along one side, lined with empty glasses and chipped mugs. The silence inside was even more pronounced than outside. There were no voices, no clatter of conversation, no sound of footsteps on the wooden floor, just the low crackle of the fire and the soft flicker of candlelight. The strange stillness settled over James like a shroud. The stool creaked under James as he eased himself down, dropping his pack by his feet with a grunt. The inn's warmth pressed in around him, fire snapping in the hearth, soft candlelight flickering against the wood-panelled walls. He ran a hand through his damp hair, the cold still clinging to his jacket. His boots ached on his feet. "Evening," he said, voice rough from hours without use. The innkeeper nodded from behind the bar, middle-aged, pale. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Long walk?" James offered a tired half-laugh. "Something like that." He turned slightly to scan the room. 4 tables, 6 patrons, all seated, no one speaking. He caught the scrape of a chair leg, the faint clink of glass, the brittle pop from the fire. But no voices. Not anymore. He frowned. Odd. He looked back toward the bar. The innkeeper wiped a glass with slow, deliberate motions. The rag moved in tight circles, over and over. James waited for him to speak again, maybe ask if he wanted a drink. He didn't. James shifted on the stool, boots scraping the floor. The sound felt too loud. His shoulders tensed. He glanced behind him. They were staring, all of them. 6 pairs of eyes, fixed, unblinking. One man had his elbows on the table, hands folded beneath his chin. Another woman held her glass, not drinking, just holding it mid-air. Their faces were too blank. No curiosity, no amusement, just focus. James looked away quickly, swallowed. The room felt hotter now, like the fire had surged behind him. He cleared his throat. He turned to the innkeeper again. Is there a village nearby? I thought I'd be there by now. The man kept wiping the glass. James waited. Still nothing. He reached for the map in his jacket pocket, fumbled it open on the bar. The edges were torn, the ink faded in places. He pointed to a smudged stretch near the moor's edge. Here, he said. I thought this road led to... The innkeeper's hand froze. Mid-wipe. James's mouth went dry. Behind him, a chair creaked. Slowly. He turned again. All 6 still stared. Same expressions. Same posture. None of them moved. A trick of the light. No. Something else. James blinked. His chest tightened. He closed the map, slid it back into his jacket. Never mind, he muttered. He faced forward, suddenly aware of the sweat prickling at the back of his neck. They kept watching. And he didn't know why. James shoved the bar stool back. It toppled with a dull clatter. The sound barely echoed in the suffocating silence. He grabbed his backpack and went for the door, only to discover it was now locked. He stepped toward the innkeeper, jaw clenched tight, fingers curled into fists. I want to leave, James said, voice low but shaking. Now, where's the key? The innkeeper's head tilted, slow and stiff. That same hollow smile stretched across his face. James slammed a hand on the bar. Don't screw with me. The innkeeper blinked once, twice. Then his face broke. Not in emotion. Literally broke. Skin split down the middle like wet paper. Flesh peeled back, bubbling, sliding in thick layers that glistened. Bones cracked behind the shifting mass. Eyes sank inward, leaving 2 sockets that pulsed with something wrong. Blackness. Depthless. As if they went farther than they should. James stumbled back. His breath hitched. What the hell? A sound rose behind him, wet, clicking, sinew stretching. He turned. The patrons stood now, twisted, spines arched too far, limbs too long or too short. One man's jaw unhinged, teeth blooming out in rows like fishhooks. Another's skin mottled to peat black, slick with moisture, as though she'd crawled up from a bog. James backed toward the door, hands raised, heart punching at his ribs. No, no, no. They didn't rush, didn't run. They crept. Not creatures of hunger, of inevitability. What are you? He whispered. The one nearest, a woman in what had once been a green shawl, grinned, but the smile split her cheeks to the ears. She whispered something in a language he didn't know. Words crawled under his skin like ants. The room bent around him. The walls swelled. The beams groaned overhead. He heard things beneath the floorboards, shifting, breathing, remembering. He backed into the door, grabbed the knob, yanked. It didn't move. Another voice behind him, guttural and dry. The more gives, we take. James screamed and slammed his shoulder into the door. Again, again. Wood cracked but didn't break. They were closer now. The innkeeper stepped forward, no longer bothering with human pretense. His voice came from somewhere too deep, like it echoed up from inside the walls. You chose the road, it said. James's chest heaved. I made a mistake. No, the creature hissed. You fulfilled it. The others circled, feet dragged, mouths opened wide. Their forms shimmered like heat above asphalt, unstable, in flux. born from fog and rot and silence. James slammed his fists into the door, knuckles splitting. James tried to run, but slipped on the wet floorboards, landed hard, elbow cracked against old wood. Pain flared. He didn't care. He scrambled to his feet, turned left, blocked. A creature loomed in the hallway, once a man, now a silhouette stitched from smoke and bone. Limbs too long, twitching. He spun back toward the bar. More of them. All of them. Every face in the room now collapsed into something else. Something wrong. No symmetry. No soul. Shadows peeled off the walls, thick as oil, dragging with them the stench of moss and blood. He bolted toward the rear door. Locked. Window. He lunged for it, shoved the latch. Nothing. It refused to move. Breathing grew louder behind him, not his. Something wheezed. He turned. They stood still. Every single one. Watching. A moment passed. Then they surged. Not with sound. Not like animals. Like mist rolling downhill. Inevitable. Silent. James backed into the corner, arms raised. Please. His voice cracked. He couldn't finish the word. They moved in closer. Walls pulsed, floor swelled. The ceiling warped above him like stretched leather, old and rotted. His knees gave out. He sank to the floor, heart hammering in his throat. No, he whispered. No, no! The innkeeper's voice came from nowhere, from everywhere. You gave us shape, it said. You looked and saw people, that was your mistake. They stopped inches from him, breathing in unison now. Air thickened, grew damp. Then it unfolded. Not one of them, all of them. They bent backward, flesh tore, bones snapped in half, fell inside. From their chests, their mouths, their sockets, tentacles slid out. Wet, black, pulsing with veins of blue light. Dozens, hundreds, moving like they tasted the air. The room darkened. Not from lack of light, from the thing growing above them, forming in the ceiling's collapse. A great slithering mass of tendrils and void, stitched together with old whispers and forgotten screams. It pulsed once. The walls moaned. James trembled. Tears welled but didn't fall. His body wouldn't move. Couldn't. The fear rooted too deep now. He tried to scream. Nothing came. They didn't kill him. Not yet. They fed. He felt it. Sharp. Sudden. Like something tearing out a part of him he didn't know could be taken. Despair poured out of him like blood. His worst memory surfaced without warning. His brother, the river, the scream that never got there in time. They feasted. He choked on it. And in that moment, James understood. This wasn't death. It was beginning. The first hour of something longer, something older than time, and far, far worse. Hope you enjoyed our story. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from the void.